Picture a small plant sitting on your desk. You've thought about watering it, but then an email arrives, a deadline gets closer, or someone asks you for a quick favor. Those things just feel much more important at the moment. And because the plant still looks fine on the outside, the thought of watering it eventually gets buried under everything else. Then one morning, you notice that several leaves have turned yellow. It looks as though the plant changed overnight, even though it has actually been waiting for water all week. And the uncomfortable truth is, if you're usually the person everyone can depend on, this may be exactly how you treat yourself. When you're upset, you finish the task first. When you're exhausted, you just wait for the day to be over. When something feels off, you tell yourself you'll deal with it later, but somehow, later never comes. Your emotions always seem to live at the very bottom of your priority list. Today, we're going to look at exactly why this happens and what we can actually do about it. The main reason this keeps happening is that we rarely recognize how different the feedback is between finishing a task and taking care of an emotion. When you finish a task, you get a visible result. You know exactly what you accomplished. The feedback you get from taking care of an emotion, though, is often much harder to see. You rarely get a clear prize for noticing that you're overwhelmed. So your brain learns a much stronger lesson from completing the task. The next time a task pops up, you naturally assume that the task goes first. And without even realizing it, you'll once again put your own feelings very low on your priority list. And this can go on for a long time, because you can actually keep functioning at a very high level through sheer willpower. But keeping everything together on the outside only proves that you're really good at controlling your actions. It doesn't mean the constant tension inside of you is gone. The cost of this is something that looks sudden, but has actually been building for a long time. One day, you simply don't want to continue. You may not even have enough energy to find out what happened. You just want everything to stop for a while. And because you completed all your previous tasks so well, this crash seems to come out of nowhere. When this happens, it's really easy to blame yourself. But you may also be thinking that keeping emotions out of a task is just a normal part of discipline. Isn't that what capable adults are supposed to do? You feel like you did nothing wrong. And honestly, you're right about part of it. Being able to finish a task under pressure without letting your emotions interfere is a highly valuable ability. We need it in all kinds of situations, such as when you're a paramedic treating a patient, or when you're simply dealing with a crisis that can't wait. But there's one thing we often misunderstand. Keeping an emotion out of the way is already one way of managing it. When you put fear or anger aside so you can keep working, you've actually chosen suppression. Suppression itself is a form of emotion regulation. You see, a task doesn't just include the work that needs to be done. It also includes the person doing the work. How you regulate your emotions is already a hidden part of the task. This is exactly why we can never truly skip our emotions and just do the work. Whether we realize it or not, we'll always use some method to handle our feelings during a task. Including emotion regulation in the task doesn't mean you have to express, solve, or deeply analyze every single feeling the moment it comes up. It just means we need to start paying attention to how we're responding. There's nothing inherently wrong with suppression. The problem begins when it gradually becomes our default response to nearly every task and emotion. It's only one member of a much larger family, alongside reappraisal, problem solving, acceptance, seeking support, and recovery. But once it becomes a default, we eventually forget those other tools are even there. A major reason we form this habit is that the environment around us often heavily rewards this exact reaction. The environment demands that we smile at rude customers. It expects us to be on call, no matter how tired we are. It treats making time for rest like a lack of commitment. Completing the work is highly visible, but the emotional labor behind it is almost never counted. That is how you become more practiced at suppression, until it starts to feel automatic. If you can find a healthier environment, all the better. But if you can't, then we need to learn how to actively break this habit. So what should you do exactly? Well, that depends on the situation. The real goal here is regulatory flexibility. Research actually shows that this is much more important than trying to get rid of all negative feelings. You just look at what's happening right now and choose a more appropriate response. There's a fairly simple rule for matching the tool to the problem. If something really is urgent, you can use suppression for the moment and return to the emotion later. If the emotion points to a problem you can change, you may need to have a conversation, solve the problem, or set a boundary. If the situation absolutely cannot be changed, you can try to accept it, reframe it, or seek support. And if the main problem is simply exhaustion, you focus on recovery first. Always look at what the current problem is before deciding which regulation method you need. Let's say you're angry, but the task still has to be finished. A healthy response would be to acknowledge that you're angry, decide that this isn't the moment to act on it, and promise yourself that you'll come back to it this afternoon. An unhealthy response would be to tell yourself that you shouldn't be angry at all, and then work until you stop noticing it. That first kind of suppression is temporary and strategic. The second kind treats suppression as the default response to all emotions. So what does it mean for suppression to be temporary and strategic? It means that whenever you choose suppression, you also leave a return point for the emotion. A return point just means setting a clear time to come back and respond to the emotion you put aside and the situation that caused it. You can borrow a natural transition that already exists in your day. This could be your commute home, a short walk after lunch, or the few minutes right after a meeting ends. When that return point arrives, just give yourself a few minutes and ask what would help now. You may need to solve the problem, talk to someone, accept what happened, ask for support, or simply recover. The entire purpose of a return point is to remind yourself to set aside a concrete time for your emotions. Without a return point, you can keep saying later until another task takes over. Apart from setting a return point, we also need to reinforce a different set of priorities by making room for something that nourishes you. One way to do that is to choose a hobby that matters to you personally, with no deadline and no one rushing you. Protect a minimum amount of time for it each week. This gives your brain new evidence that caring for yourself and protecting your personal time can also bring satisfaction, progress, and a genuine sense of reward. This is how you finally start watering your own roots, so your well-being doesn't always have to live at the bottom of your priority list. But you might find that even when you understand all of this, you still habitually choose to suppress your emotions the second you face a task. In that case, we might need to step back and look at what's actually motivating you. Because your motivation is what determines whether you're genuinely practicing self-discipline or if you've just fallen into the trap of perfectionism. From the outside, self-discipline and perfectionism can look almost identical, but from the inside, they feel completely different. With self-discipline, you care about the task and believe it's worth doing, so you willingly put your emotions aside for now. With perfectionism, you feel like you have no choice at all. If you stop, or if you don't suppress your emotions so you can keep going, it means you're a failure. Any interruption feels like proof of your inadequacy. You feel like you have no right to rest until you've completed the task perfectly. Research shows that burnout is much more closely tied to perfectionistic concerns, such as fear of mistakes, harsh self-criticism, and tying your worth to your performance than to high standards alone. In both cases, you complete the work, but that second motivation makes long-term performance much harder to sustain. So it really helps to ask yourself what exactly is motivating you to suppress your emotions in order to stay disciplined. There's a very quick way to tell the difference. Forget how urgent the task is for a second. Just imagine that you stop right now, or that you completely mess it up in the end. Pay attention to your very first reaction. If your pain primarily comes from regretting the outcome of the task, that's closer to healthy striving. If your reaction immediately turns into a judgment about yourself, it's closer to perfectionistic concerns. The key isn't how strong the emotion is. The key is whether the evaluation lands on the task, or if it lands on you. Once you can tell the difference, you may still choose to finish the task, and that's okay. You don't have to give up your ambition or lower your standards. You can still keep going. Just make sure that this time you're choosing to continue rather than being pushed forward by fear. So let's wrap this up. It really just comes down to two things. First, putting emotion management back inside the task and choosing a method from the larger toolbox based on the situation. And second, noticing whether pushing through is an active choice or if it's just being driven by threat and identity judgment. Let's get back to the plant we mentioned earlier. Don't wait until it's withered to decide it deserves water. And don't wait until you actually feel pain to make taking care of yourself a higher priority. You can absolutely continue to be that disciplined person. Just next time, don't leave yourself out of the task. I've created a PDF guide that covers everything we talked about today. You can download it using the link below. If you often leave work exhausted and want to understand why noise and interruptions affect you so much, watch my video on sensory overload at work next. You can click on it right here. Thanks for watching. Take care. I'll see you in the next one.